Chuck Norris lost his first 10 fights, every single one of them, and then he never lost again. This is the story of a kid who grew up dirt poor with an alcoholic father, got destroyed in tournament after tournament, and somehow became an undefeated world champion. Along the way he trained with Bruce Lee, got pushed into acting by Steve McQueen, lost his brother in Vietnam, and 50 years later became one of the biggest internet jokes of all time. 10 moments from his life, all of them documented. Let's get into it. Ryan, Oklahoma, March 10, 1940. A kid named Carlos Ray Norris comes into the world, and everyone calls him Chuck. Oldest of 3 boys in a family that can't seem to stay in one place, and his dad Ray bounces between jobs like truck driver, mechanic, bus driver, whatever pays. Ray's got a drinking problem though, the kind where he disappears on binges that last for months, blows his entire paycheck on booze, leaves his wife Wilma to figure out how to feed 3 kids on nothing. 16 moves by the time Chuck turns 15, evictions and unpaid rent and running from debt, trailers and cheap apartments across Oklahoma, California, Arizona, wherever's cheapest. Chuck described himself years later as shy, non-athletic, and scholastically mediocre in his own words, embarrassed by everything from his dad's drinking to the poverty. Couldn't even speak up in class without freezing. His parents split when he turned 16, and his dad walked out for good, which meant Chuck became the man of the house at an age when most kids are worried about getting their driver's license. Helped his mom raise his 2 younger brothers Wieland and Aaron, worked odd jobs, did what he had to do. Barely graduated high school in 1958 with no plan, no skills, no confidence. So he did what a lot of lost kids did back then and joined the military. Osan Air Base in South Korea is where everything changes for Chuck, and that's where he discovers Tang Soo Do, Korean martial arts, the first thing in his entire life he's actually good at. Training like a maniac and earning his black belt while he's still overseas, then keeping at it when he gets back to the States at March Air Force Base in California. Discharge papers come in 1962, and he opens a little karate school in Torrance, applies to be a cop, and the school barely makes any money, but he's found his thing. Or so he thinks. His first karate tournament happens in 1964, when he's 24 years old, and he loses badly, not even close. Second tournament loses again. Third tournament another loss. And the names of the guys beating him start piling up like Allenstein and Joe Louis and Luis Delgado. Some guy named Tony Tulliners destroys him 3 rounds straight at the International Karate Championships. And from 1964 to early 1968, Chuck Norris loses 10 fights that aren't close calls, but actual beatings. The kind where you walk away thinking maybe you should just quit. His own students start asking questions that cut deep. If you keep losing tournaments, why should we train with you? And it's a fair question when you think about it. Norris keeps showing up though, keeps entering tournaments, keeps getting his ass kicked, and then something shifts that nobody sees coming. November 24th, 1968. Norris gets matched up against Luis Delgado again, the same guy who handed him his 10th loss earlier that year. This time Chuck wins and takes the professional middleweight karate champion title. And here's the crazy part. From that day on, Chuck Norris never loses another official fight, not one. 6 straight years running undefeated from 1968 to 1974. Every major championship falls to him, including the National Karate Championships, World Middleweight, All-American, the Internationals, all of them. Black Belt magazine names him Fighter of the Year in 1969. He wins karate's Triple Crown for most tournament wins in a single year. Becomes the first guy ever voted into the Black Belt Hall of Fame 3 times. Final record sits at 183 wins, 10 losses, 2 draws, and all 10 losses came in those first 4 years, while the next 6 years stay perfect. Madison Square Garden, 1967. Chuck just won a tournament and Bruce Lee's they're doing a demonstration, and after the event they start talking about martial arts philosophy, fighting techniques, training methods. The conversation goes until 4 in the morning, and according to people who were there it ends with both of them sparring in a hallway until the sun comes up. And that's how they meet. 2 years of training together in Bruce's backyard in Culver City follow. 3-hour sessions of pull-ups, sit-ups, sparring, bag work. One day Chuck notices something that seems off. Bruce never kicks above the waist, never goes for the head, So Chuck asks him why. Bruce explains his philosophy about how kicking high is too risky, too easy to get taken down. A martial artist shouldn't do it. But Chuck disagrees and tells Bruce, look, you should be ready to strike anywhere. If someone leaves their head open, you take the shot. Bruce thinks about it, and within 6 months Bruce Lee's high kicks become the stuff of legend. Dan Inosanto and Richard Bustillo both confirmed it later. Chuck Norris taught Bruce Lee how to kick high. And those spinning back kicks, the jump kicks, the stuff that made Bruce famous all came from Chuck showing him those techniques. A 2022 interview has Norris saying Bruce had different philosophies back then than I did. He thought you shouldn't kick high. I also told him you're going to burn yourself out if you keep training nonstop without rest. But Bruce trained anyway because he couldn't help himself. Training ends in 1970 when Bruce moves to Hong Kong for his film career. But 2 years later Bruce calls with an offer, a movie, a fight scene in the Roman Colosseum. Rome, Italy, 1972. And Bruce is filming Way of the Dragon with plans to shoot the big climactic fight inside the actual Roman Colosseum. Not some recreation or studio set, but the real deal. One problem stands in the way, though. It's illegal. You can't film inside the Colosseum. Hollywood movies like Spartacus and Gladiator had to fake it because nobody gets to shoot in there. Bruce doesn't care what the rules say. And according to Matthew Polly's biography, Bruce and his crew bribe Roman officials to get inside. Film at night with a tiny crew and minimal equipment, just Bruce, Chuck, and a camera team. This is basically Chuck's first real movie role with no dialogue, just has to fight. But because they're both actual champions, the authenticity is insane, and the fight scene runs 10 minutes, and it's still considered one of the greatest martial arts sequences ever filmed. The movie makes over $130 million worldwide, and becomes the highest-grossing film of 1972 in Hong Kong. And years later, when people ask Chuck if they were really fighting, he always says the same thing. We sparred together for years, but in a real fight Bruce would have beaten me. His speed was unbelievable. Back teaching karate in Los Angeles in 1974, and one of Chuck's students happens to be Steve McQueen, literally the biggest movie star on the planet, the king of cool himself. Steve sought Chuck out after watching him compete, because he wanted to learn real fighting instead of Hollywood choreography. And they become friends over time. One day after class, Steve says you should try acting. And Chuck laughs, because what? He's never taken an acting class in his life. Never even did a high school play. Steve's serious, though, and tells him it's not about lessons. You've got presence. You project something. But Chuck says no until Steve reminds him of something. All that positive thinking philosophy Chuck's been teaching him in karate. The whole you can achieve anything with the right mindset thing. You told me that. Steve says, now apply it to yourself. Chuck thinks it over, because his karate schools are struggling, and he needs money. His family needs stability. So he says yes. Steve gets him into acting classes at MGM, hooks him up with connections, keeps encouraging him when the critics tear him apart. And Chuck said in a 1978 interview that Steve not only helped him start his film career, he encouraged me when I was pelted by my first round of critics, told me don't worry what critics think. What really matters is what the audience thinks. That advice sticks with him for 30 years. Breaker Breaker comes out in 1977 as his first big starring role, made on a shoestring budget with critics hating it and audiences loving it. Then 1978's Good Guys, where Black gets shot for $1 million and makes over $18 million, turning Chuck into the first successful homegrown American martial arts movie star. Steve McQueen dies in 1980 and never gets to see Chuck really blow up. But before he dies, Steve finds religion, becomes a Christian, and in 1973 Steve and Chuck fly together to Bruce Lee's funeral in San Francisco, where they're both pallbearers. 3 legends all connected, and if Steve hadn't said something that day after karate class, Chuck might have stayed a karate instructor his whole life. Somewhere in California in 1970, Chuck's refereeing a karate tournament when an announcement comes over the loudspeaker. Chuck Norris, you have an urgent call. Walking to the phone, he finds his mother-in-law crying on the other end, saying your brother Whelan's been killed in Vietnam. And Chuck said later that if he'd been kicked in the stomach by a dozen karate champions at the same time, it couldn't have hit him harder. Whelan Clyde Norris, Private First Class, Company A, 2nd Battalion, 56th Infantry, 101st Airborne, killed June 3, 1970 in Thua Tien Province, Vietnam at 26 years old, 1 month before his 28th birthday. The part that haunts Chuck to this day is that when Wieland was 12, he told Chuck, "I won't live to see 28. Just a feeling, a premonition, something he knew." And he was right. Firebase Ripcord is where Wieland died, defending his position during the longest battle of the Vietnam War that ran from March 12th to July 23rd, 1970, with 75 Americans killed, including Wieland. The battle was so brutal the military put a media blackout on it because the public was exhausted from Vietnam. Hamburger Hill had just happened a year earlier, and they didn't want another PR nightmare. So Ripcord got fought in silence, and the stories only came out years later. Bob Kalsu, who was Rookie of the Year for the Buffalo Bills in 1968, was killed at Ripcord too, and Wieland got the Silver Star for valor posthumously. Chuck wrote in 2007 that I still miss my brother terribly. I think of Wieland often, and I'm comforted only by the certainty that one day we'll be giving him a great big hug in heaven, and he never forgot. Made damn sure the world didn't either. Cannon Films comes to Chuck in 1984 with a pitch for a Vietnam POW rescue movie about a guy named Colonel James Braddock who escapes a prison camp and comes back years later to save the guys left behind. Other studios won't touch it because Vietnam movies aren't popular, too controversial, too raw. But Chuck says yes because he wants to honor Wieland. Filming Missing in Action in the Philippines with Chuck playing Braddock as this silent, deadly one-man army with barely any dialogue, just action. And there's a weird production story where it was supposed to be 2 films shot back-to-back, but Cannon realizes the second one they shot is actually better than the first, so they switched them. The prequel becomes the main film, and the main film becomes the sequel. And Missing in Action opens in 1984, making $6 million its first weekend, and earning $26 million total as one of Cannon's biggest hits. Critics call it a Rambo knockoff, and audiences don't care one bit. And there's this scene at the end where Braddock brings rescued POWs to a conference in Saigon that had people standing up and clapping in theaters. Chuck said one of the biggest thrills of my life was going to see Missing in Action and watching everyone stand up and applaud at the end. And 2 sequels follow with Missing in Action 2 The Beginning in 85 and Braddock, Missing in Action 3 in 88. The trilogy making almost $40 million total. Chuck dedicates all 3 films to Wieland with the same dedication at the end of each movie. To Wieland Norris, who gave his life for his country. Appearing on War Stories with Oliver North in 2012, Chuck talks about Firebase Ripcord, about Wieland, about the sacrifice, making sure people remembered. CBS launches a new show on April 21st, 1993 called Walker, Texas Ranger with Chuck Norris playing Cordell Walker. A Texas Ranger who solves crimes with martial arts, old school values, and a cowboy hat. Sounds ridiculous on paper, but it becomes massive, running for 9 seasons and 203 episodes until May 19, 2001, and critics absolutely hate it, with Entertainment Weekly giving it a C+ and calling it cheesy, over the top, absurd. Nobody cares what the critics think though, and Season 1 pulls an 11.7 rating at number 41 in the country. Season 2 stays the same. Season 3 jumps to number 18. And by Seasons 5 and 6, Walker's pulling 14.4 million viewers as a top 15 show in America. 14.4 million people tuning in every Saturday night at 9 o'clock. And the show gets broadcast in over 100 countries, dubbed into dozens of languages, syndicated on USA Network for years. Chuck even sings the theme song Eyes of a Ranger and wins an award for it. And the show has a simple formula, where Walker kicks bad guys, teaches morals, solves crimes, repeat. Shouldn't have worked, but it did, and a TV critic named Doug Nye wrote, in 1990 for that Walker, Texas Ranger is the closest thing we have to an old-time Western. Chuck Norris has made Saturday nights at 9 the most entertaining they've been since Gunsmoke 20 years ago. The show makes Chuck one of the most recognizable people on Earth. And then a decade later, something nobody expected happens, when Walker becomes a punchline that makes Chuck more famous than the show ever did. Late Night with Conan O'Brien in 2004, and NBC merges with Universal, which suddenly gives Conan access to tons of old TV footage without paying licensing fees. Starting this bit called the Walker Texas Ranger lever with a simple concept. He's got a lever next to his desk that when pulled plays a random Walker clip. Usually something absurd like bad dialogue or over-the-top action or martial arts nonsense. And people laugh, while Chuck becomes a joke. Something else happens though, and it starts in 2005 on the Something Awful forums, with a thread called Post Your Vin Diesel Facts. Just satirical stuff about how tough Vin Diesel is, like Vin Diesel can divide by zero, and Vin Diesel's tears cure cancer too bad, he's never cried. Goes viral, and someone suggests, what if we did this with Chuck Norris instead? And a college student creates a website called chucknorrisfacts.com, where every time you refresh, a new fact appears. Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he pushes the earth down. Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice. 10 million hits in a month, and by 2006 Chuck Norris Facts are everywhere on Facebook, MySpace, email forwards, t-shirts, bumper stickers. Mike Huckabee runs campaign ads with Chuck Norris Facts during his 2008 presidential run, and the phenomenon goes global, gets translated into dozens of languages, shows up in India and Poland everywhere, with people making them about their own local celebrities. What's wild is that Chuck doesn't get mad but leans into it, publishing the official Chuck Norris Fact book in 2009 that makes the bestseller list, going on talk shows reading his favorites, using the whole meme to promote charities, writing on his own website that some are funny, some are pretty far out, and thankfully most are just promoting harmless fun. And he gets it. The meme makes him relevant to kids who never watched Walker, kids born in the 90s who have no clue who he is, suddenly know everything about him. A 65-year-old martial artist becomes a cultural phenomenon because the internet turns him into a joke, and he's smart enough to laugh along. Wilma Norris was there through everything, the poverty, the losses, the championships, the fame, losing Wieland. Raised 3 boys basically alone, while her husband drank himself stupid. Survived 16 moves in 15 years. Watched her son lose 10 fights straight, and then become world champion. Saw him train with Bruce Lee and teach Steve McQueen and bury his brother. Living to be 102 years old and dying in 2024. And Chuck credited her for everything, saying she endured the deaths of her 2 husbands, a stepson, 2 grandchildren, and my younger brother Wieland in Vietnam. She always prayed for me. She asked God to save her boy. The boy she prayed for became a legend. Retirement from competition comes for Chuck Norris in 1974, not because he lost or got hurt, but because there's nobody left to fight. 34 years old, walking away as undefeated world champion after training over 325 students to black belt, opening 32 schools across America, founding his own organization, creating his own martial arts style. Natural talent had nothing to do with it though. He was shy, weak, uncoordinated, lost his first 10 fights, became champion through pure stubbornness and training and discipline, and refusing to quit. Always said the same thing in interviews: whatever luck I had, I made. I was never a natural athlete, but I paid my dues in sweat and concentration, and took the time necessary to learn karate and become world champion. Nobody could beat him from 1968 to 1974, and when he retired he did it on his own terms, undefeated. 6 straight years as world champion. Lost his first 10 fights, trained with Bruce Lee, got pushed into acting by Steve McQueen, fought illegally in the Roman Coliseum, lost his brother in Vietnam, dedicated 3 films to his memory, starred in a show that 14 million people watched every week, became an internet meme that made him famous all over again. Growing up dirt poor with an alcoholic dad, and holding the world title for 6 years without a single loss. And some champions are born talented, some are born rich. Chuck Norris was born with neither. Had something better though. Refused to quit even after losing 10 fights in a row, even when everyone told him to give up. That's what makes you a legend.